in our present. It is June 25th.
And that means this week's past. Hello, and welcome. This is This Week's Past, a podcast coming live at you from Twitch.
Or later via YouTube and as podcast via any and all of your favorite podcast distributors. Wherever you are, whenever you are.
Let's talk about some past. So what do we have for our main story?
Well,
Sybille?
for our main story this week, we will be talking about politics, social media and play. And of course, as is sort of obligatory for this Vodcast, how these things relate to the past. And special guests today are Professor Frans Willem Korsten and Dr. Sara Polak. And please, could you introduce yourself?
I'm Sara Polak. I'm a lecturer in American Studies, and my focus is on US presidents and their media, and hence also social media.
And Frans Willem?
I'm a percussionist in a band.
I know you play. But what about politics?
And I am a professor by special appointment at the Erasmus School of Philosophy. And I focus on, let's say, the intersection between literature, art, and law. And sovereignty, and that's where politics comes in.
Yeah, literature, law, very interdisciplinary stuff all happening there, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And also with a very keen interest in the past in that
absolutely
context. Yeah,
the Baroque.
Yeah.
So, as always, if you're with us on Twitch, we would love to hear from you. Put questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer them. If you're watching us on YouTube, later on, put the questions in the comments, and we'll try to answer them there.
Right, and now let's get into some news from this week.
Bam. So, for our first news bit today, we're talking about a situation that has it's been going on for a while at Princeton, at the Department of Classics, and how there was this whole argument that they dumped it down in a way. They tried to refreshen their program, and for that reason, they didn't make it obligatory anymore for students to take language lessons, so ancient Greek or Latin. And there has been a lot of controversy about this, whether this is good for classics or a bad thing for classics, whether it makes classics more inclusive, because there are other ways of approaching classics, or whether you actually can't do classics without doing ancient languages. So there's been a lot of discussion about this. The fact of the matter is that no classes will be cut, at least that's what they said, but it's not going to be obligatory anymore. So if you want to major in classics, probably you still have to do some of them, but you can also choose different tracks. But there has been a lot of discussion all around, I would say, in classics and these kind of departments about their usefulness or the inclusion of languages or not, and to what level should we do this? What do you think about this, Sybille?
Find it interesting. Of course, they're very high in the rankings, higher than Leiden University, which is also in the top 10, I must say. But what will this do to their sort of classical standards?
Yeah.
And in a way, how you describe it now, it's about making studying more democratic, I would say.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, because you can still do the classic stuff if you want to. But you also have other choices. Frans Willem, would you say?
I think it's inevitable, and it's a good thing as well. So it's you can make also sort of comparisons here. Like, you can only use a computer if you know how you program a computer, which is also nonsensical. So there's such an enormous amount of information and stories and culture and art in classics for which you don't need languages. and that you might be interested in and be introduced to in an adequate way.
So it will be more wider spread in a way when you open it up, you would say.
Yeah, so to bring in, let's say, a more dangerous topic, the study of Italian in Leiden, for instance, I've been propagating for years that at least 1/3 of the program should be in Dutch or in English, because there's people there who have an enormous amount of knowledge about Italy and the past and the present, and they can only teach that to students who also do Italian in this case. So there as well, I would say, open it up.
Interesting, yeah. Sarah?
I don't know. I remember when I was, I think, perhaps 14 or 15 years old, I was at a classical gymnasium where you study Greek and Latin. And I was on the committee to hire a new rector for the school. And the best candidate had not done Greek and Latin herself. And I was very opposed to that appointment. Because, of course, this was, what they were putting their students through, like 6 hours of Latin and 6 hours of Greek every week. To have someone who couldn't do that, I thought was a terrible idea. She turned out to be a very good rector. So,
yeah. So that shows it's not all in one particular expertise.
I don't
whether
think
you can do something. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, and Angus also in the chat says that this is the analogy between coding and computer use is an apt one, because there are so many things that you can do. As you say, you can do philosophy, and you don't necessarily need to be able to read. There are arguments of why you would understand certain concepts maybe better if you can, but then you just need to understand the concepts. You don't necessarily need to be able to translate from English to ancient Greek, for example.
But can you be an archaeologist without digging?
No, but this is a methodological aspect. I mean, on the contrary, maybe yes, you actually can be an archaeologist without digging, and nowadays plenty of archaeologists are not digging,
but use computers.
Yeah, exactly. They use computers. So 2 weeks ago, we had Alex Branson, who hasn't been digging for a very long time, but he's doing digital archaeology.
Maybe in his backyard, but that's something else. Yeah.
I mean, I'm doing archaeology of play, and I'm not digging. I'm just playing. But then that's a different story.
You dig, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. That wraps it up, I think, for this news piece. So, next news piece, Sybille.
Yeah. That's another interesting one. Archaeologists discover and crack an intact 1,000-year-old chicken egg. The team discovered the egg in a cesspit in the industrial zone of the ancient city of Yavne. I wonder how that egg smelled, actually, when they cracked it. Must have been horrible. But the team discovered the egg there, and even today, as I quote, eggs rarely survive for long in supermarket cartons. We all remember we sometimes can't even transport them home, right? At least I'm quite bad at that. So this is a quote from Nagorsky in a statement, and they also say, it's amazing to think this is a 1,000-year-old find. Per the statement, the shell cracked despite staff taking extreme caution when removing it from the cesspit under the supervision of an experienced conservationist. And I quote again, chickens were domesticated in Southeast Asia relatively recently, around 6,000 years ago. For me, as a non-archaeologist or historian, that seems an awful long time ago, but anyway. But it took time for them to enter the human diet, she says. They were used for other purposes, such as cockfighting. I hope not the eggs, but the cocks themselves. Yeah. And they were considered beautiful animals, exhibited in ancient zoos and given as presents to kings. Wow, they cracked the egg, but with that, they didn't crack the riddle of the egg, you could say.
No, and this is actually very interesting for a number of ways. First of all, they accidentally cracked the egg indeed in the lab.
Failure.
Yeah, but then they managed to preserve parts of it, of the yolk, in it for future DNA research, and they can do DNA research in the thing that cracked. It probably did smell quite horribly. Interestingly, in this site, they also found three little dolls. But I wanted to focus on the chickens, because there is another interesting thing about chickens.
Yeah.
A few years ago, we held a conference here in Leiden, and we had these two amazing women, Tiet Fothergill and Catherine Flick, who did research on chickens in video games and representation of chickens in video games and what chickens mean for players today and how we perceive chickens from an ethical point of view. Do they symbol cowardice? Do they symbol, in some societies, braveness? Or as we've read here, sometimes they were present to kings. So they really have a very long history, chickens and eggs for that matter.
It's the chicken and the egg, right?
Yeah, exactly. Frans Willem, do you have anything to say about chickens?
I read that it was still intact because it was found in clothes.
Yeah, it was indeed found in clothes.
And actually, I was far more interested in the clothes that the egg was preserved. And I would also like to question again, so what were they looking for? Archaeology is a political thing, right, in Israel?
Archaeology
seems to be such an innocent thing, an egg. But
archaeology as a concept could be indeed a very political thing, but sometimes archaeology can also be very innocent in that sense, because you get to find, the lives of people, and the lives of people are not.
So my point would be, I think, Aris, that you can go for the innocent aspect of the egg, but what were you looking for actually?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, clothing.
Clothing, indeed, clothing.
And I love chickens. I had them.
Yeah.
Without they're giving any eggs anymore, but they were lovely. My favorite animals.
They're very cuddly, right?
Chickens are great animals,
it's very great fun to talk to them. I mean, some philosophers would immediately get angry because you can't talk to an animal, and they're stupid. So philosophers that say that you can't talk to an animal are stupid philosophers.
Because we are animals as well, anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There is actually this comic, I don't know if you've come across it, it's called Elmer, and it's like a comic series, and like the basic idea is it's about chickens at one point get the intelligence and like all kind of human capacities, but they still remain chickens. So there's a sort of like endless line of, interspecies racism or speciesism, I guess you would call it, and about the sort of like how do chickens then acquire human rights, and how do people, of course, particularly think about human-chicken relationships. And it's there's work to be done there.
There could be a whole research project on chickens and eggs from a multicultural and multidisciplinary perspective, right?
But the first thing I thought of when I read this, Aris, was a Donald Duck comic that I once read, which is also about ancient, I think 2,000-year-old eggs that they find. And the interesting thing about them is that they are cube-shaped.
Yes, the square eggs.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Again, an important classic from chicken comics.
Exactly, very important classic. Very, very good observation indeed. I will actually bring up the Alan Nagorski in the screen. Hopefully, my Chrome.
And why were they square? So that you could build houses with them, or what?
I forget. I don't know if the story.
No, it was the whole point. It was that you could actually stack them more efficiently.
Right.
So they were for
really?
transport. Yeah, Scrooge was very happy that they found them because they could actually be more profitable because you just could stack them on top of each other. At the screen, you can
Lots
see
to
now.
say about eggs. Yeah.
You can see Alan Nagorski and holding actually that egg that they found in Israel. A beautiful egg, I might say. I wouldn't eat it, but hey. All right. Final news beat for the week. Oh no, it's actually
no, it's you.
It's me. So the last news bit has to do with light, actually. And 2 weeks ago, we also discussed a little bit about experiential research. And this week, we're also going to talk a little bit about experiential research. This time, there was this group of Spanish archaeologists, Spanish researchers, who took an experimental approach to lighting systems in Paleolithic caves. So, in Paleolithic times, people often lived in caves, sometimes quite deep inside the caves. And of course, it's not very easy to live there. Usually, humans would live at the edge of the caves, but then they would still venture in there, and we have all these beautiful cave drawings that exist there. So how would they see in there, how would they draw it, and how the part of the research that I find extremely interesting is how the light brings all these cave drawings to life in a way. So it's one thing, the tools that they use, the kind of torches and materials that they used for it, and the Spanish team did quite a bit of research through sampling remains on what kind of wooden poles they would use, what kind of things would put on these branches to make them lamps. But I'm much more interested in the effect of light, and sometimes you could see these figures sort of move with the flicker of the light or the flicker of the torch, and I think this is a very important insight into the lives of the prehistoric people, how they perceive the concept of the moving image, right?
Yeah, the experience of the light, really.
Yeah, the experience of the light, yeah.
It's I suppose for all history, but especially archaeology, it's so important to get that multisensorial experience as part of the discipline and part of how you understand things in the past, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm actually gonna bring this up again on the screen for people to see.
I'd also be interested in, let's say, the evolution of the eye.
Yeah.
Or whether different human species have different kinds of eyes. Because I was looking at birds today, how they look.
Yeah.
Not how they look, but how they
You talk to them,
see
I'm
things.
sure. It was a chicken. Yeah.
So they have 4 cones in their eyes, which means that if we see a blackbird, they see an extremely colored bird, which is fascinating. So suppose these beings, human beings, species, had other eyes than what we have.
Yeah.
Could also be possible.
It would. I actually don't know, but I could see that other hominins would perceive colors in different ways. Even nowadays, we have people who are colorblind or who perceive color in different ways. So I don't see why other hominins would not be able to see in different ways, which would indeed be very interesting. And also how eyes tend to our eyes are adapted in the abundance of light that we have in our culture. But of course, especially in the caves, I guess people would have to adapt in very, very low.
And you'd have very little control over how much light there was.
But it's interesting how light shapes our perception of the world in that way. Nowadays, the days are longer because we have electric lights and because we have ways of manipulating the light to create moving images. And for me, that was an interesting analogy, that nowadays we manipulate light to take pictures, to have moving images. And they would also back then manipulate the light to create their own
It is
moving
technology
images.
in a way, right?
It definitely is technology, exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Right.
This was our news segment for this week. Now we are going to move to our main segment, play and politics.
That was a good tune.
That's a good tune, indeed.
Yeah. So, it's a bit schizophrenic for me almost. Our main segment of today is about play and politics. Mm-hmm. And actually, the guests of today are close colleagues of both you as well, actually, and me. And we work together a lot. And one thing we work on as well together is on play and politics. And as I understand, because I'm part of it, I understand that very well, there's this new project starting on play and politics, Frans Willem. Could you tell us a bit about that and who you are in that equation?
Of course. I think that the entire project started with us, let's say, thinking through how people tend to talk about politics as it is manifesting itself nowadays in terms of a form of politics that seems to be something of the past. So what we noticed was that something else is going on that we have a problem dealing with, also conceptualizing, because politicians are playing in ways that we don't know from, let's say, the past.
But they did play in the past, right?
They did play in the past, absolutely.
For example?
Well, I think, let's say, if you look at all the great theorists of the Baroque, they are all talking about how politicians should be able, or leaders or princes should be able, to show something and do something else. So there's always this dynamic of showing another face to, let's say, the populace, to enemies, what have you, diplomacy. So there's intrinsic, let's say, thinking about the relation between politics and appearance, and how there's never a kind of, let's say, a coincidence between the two, but most of the time, let's say, a mismatch, right? I'm showing another face than what I'm really doing.
So it's role playing in
It's
that
role
way.
playing. That's role playing. But what we see nowadays, and I think Sarah can give beautiful examples, is something else. It's not role playing; it's something else.
But then there was also the back rooms where things were decided, and the clubs where people played
Right.
golf.
Even but even for instance, if you take a look at the music of the 17th century, all the diplomats were good musicians.
So they played in
They
that way as
played.
well.
And then the playing was something that helped you talk about something else on the side, so to speak. So let's say you could do some politics while playing, and you could play politics in the sense that you would be acting.
Yeah.
So the relation between play and politics is old, but now we're looking at what are the specifics of what's happening today.
And that's still about golf in a way, right?
Golf is central to it, yes.
Yeah, always. Yeah. Because you don't do much, I suppose, so you can do politics at
It's
the
a
same
game,
time.
but you don't really do
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I'm of course referring to Trump.
Yeah, although Obama also played a lot of golf, actually. And a lot of criticism from Trump to Obama was about his playing so much golf, which seems odd because Trump himself, of course, was a very avid, is an avid golf player.
But what's happening there? Because it's not in the golf then, that's a constant. But
Well,
it's but it's in the media they use, I suppose.
In part, let's be clear here. I think that Trump thinks that a black man shouldn't be playing golf. So, there's that.
Yeah.
But then other than that, there's Obama in many ways is a kind of politician of the kind that Frans Willem just described, someone who plays a lot of roles in a very engaging manner, but also does serious stuff on the side and is kind of honest about that in a way. Whereas Trump, I would say, conceives of himself as existing in what you could call a sort of playful or cartoonish universe, where he, in a sense, you know how in cartoons there's like different laws of nature apply. Like you can, you don't fall down when you're suspended in air unless you look down and see that there's no, and then you fall. No. Trump, in a way, kind of acts as if he's in that universe and we are all in our own. And in many ways that works well because that generates so much kind of like stuff mainly on social media, like memes and so on, that are indeed funny and also are on some level, true or ring true. Because it is a kind of playing that is all of politics in a way for him. And it feels apolitical, and at the same time, it really disrupts. Kind of
which is exactly what play does with politics, right? But you are American studies, but you also are a media scholar. So you also relate that, I believe, to how Twitter, for example, works, right?
Yeah. I think it's very much a kind of like an affordance of Twitter to create that kind of dynamic. So Donald Trump's tweets, when he still tweeted, were mostly textual. So he didn't really, tweet around memes so much. But they were texts that would kind of immediately call to mind memes that were then also kind of produced and spread around. And that kind of interaction that he had with his fan base, but also with detractors was very, very effective. Not necessarily to, reach a sort of traditional political goal in terms of, passing legislation or something. Mm-hmm. Trump was actually not terribly successful at that, which arguably isn't really necessarily what American presidents need to be good at. But he was very good in kind of entertaining and keeping busy, keeping engaged.
So it was not about the electorate as such, right? And you have another term for that, I think, as well.
Yeah. So there it's actually a coinage of Frans Willem Korsten. Now that he's here, I have to give credit where it's due. It's the idea is that what he creates in that way is a kind of constituency. And traditionally, of course, a constituency is always a geographical thing, like people
spatial material.
In a certain state elect a particular representative, and then the people in that state are that person's constituency. But here the constituency is kind of mobilized by the medium, or mobilized by a hashtag, for instance. And that principle in itself, I think, is germane to social media, not so much to Trump. I think it's true also to some extent for Black Lives Matter or for Me Too, all these kinds of movements that are political movements, but that you don't, the membership in a way is through adopting that hashtag.
Yeah. So in this project, we are going to research not only the United States and how politics and play work there, but also how media work, for example, in the Netherlands, metagaming. Bram Ifen will research that. But actually, Frans Willem, this sort of goes back to when we initially talked about things, about this sort of quality, or maybe not quality, that politics and play share. And we call that worldings, right?
Right.
Could you maybe expand upon that a bit?
Yeah. So let's say, suppose that we kind of have this classical model of, we think we live in one world, and this one world may have layers, like say, in which things appear. But then again, then immediately you already have two worlds, right? And you can also start to play, to say, okay, if this is the world, what are the possibilities of this world? Can we make another one? And that's all, in a sense, the classic logic, that politics explores what is this world, how can we organize it, how can we make another one.
So what is not, it's speculative in that way as well, would you say?
But what's happening now, I think, is something else, that you have a multiplication of worlds that is no longer ruled by this, let's say, anchor of the one world. So, for instance, you have lost the elections, but you don't acknowledge that. And then you start to say that you've won them. And if you say that enough, then that becomes a new reality.
Yeah, and the constituency can be found online sometimes, right?
Yeah. So, and something similar holds, I think, for the thing that I'm going to look at then. So let's say law is basically, let's say its function is to keep a world in order. Now, what happens if you start to play with the law? Which is what many politicians do. You're not only playing with, let's say, the one instrument that should keep a world in order, you might also be deregulating that very order to open up a possibility of another world. And another world that is not yet sketched, in a sense. I think that's the thing that fascinates me most. You
play it into being almost.
Right, yeah. Perhaps you have a blueprint, like say that you say, we're going to make a world in which we have our own coin and our own, right? That kind
TV
of stuff.
channel.
TV channel.
And that is exactly what Thierry Baudet has recently done,
yeah,
right?
Exactly,
so
that's what we were
sketched
hinting
that
at,
kind of based on a kind of old-fashioned verzuilingsmodel in a way.
Yeah. So that would be, let's say, I would find that a bit silly. But the other thing, and that's
but it happens.
It happens. But what's way more what dangerous is that you want to create an opening, and you don't know yet what's behind that opening. It's simply about creating the opening.
So that's the real speculative.
Yeah.
What is not yet there. Yeah. Thing about playing and making worlds.
Yeah. And there I think you could see, let's say, the possibility of, and that's also part of play, that you'd have to say, we're going to destroy this first, and then something else will open up. So play can also have a very destructive potential. So
as I understand it, you bring an ontological, as the philosophers will call it, a view on how law and play work in contemporary societies. Yeah.
And if I can unpack that for our listeners, so you're spot on. So let's say laws were supposed to be epistemological in the sense that it looks for the truth, right?
Yeah.
But if we now start to play with law and we open up different worlds, then we have an ontological problem.
Yeah, so ontology is about being in the world, and epistemology is about knowing the world. For the listeners here who are not familiar with those terms, they're quite simple, those academics, they want to make things complicated, sorry about that. So it's a shift from the truth to the experience in a way, would you say?
Yep, so perhaps we have to think more about this term experience, because it's more.
It's more than that, right?
It's more than that. It's really about the creation of a new world. And there I think in the course of our project we might stumble upon, let's say, the real political issues involved. Yeah. Because we live in an abysmally unequal world, and there are clearly people more capable of playing the game than others.
It's interesting, right? Because our friend in Leiden, Huizinga, already wrote about the law, about courts, as being playful.
Yep.
but with very strict rules, of course.
And seriously.
But all play according to Huizinga is serious, which we tap into in this project as well, of course.
But I would take it, I think it's interesting to take it even more back. I'll just take it even more back because I'm the archaeologist here. But a similar, even a similar political narrative or philosophical narrative would have been in classical Greece with the sophists and how narratives can be constructed and then what is the truth. And then there were different philosophers arguing for different things, whether you can actually make a different world just based on a certain argument, or whether you should have a more Platonic idea, we should actually be looking for the truth, for the ideal object.
In that cave.
Yeah, in that cave. Yeah, exactly.
With all that moving life,
It really goes back to the Paleolithic times eventually. But you can see that as an argument, this idea of, can we actually play with politics? Can we change it a little bit to make our narrative fit with it? And then the ancient Greeks also, by using theater, they would also have this kind of playful narratives in theater play, mocking other people or making memes eventually. Like if you would watch Aristophanes comedies, really the generals that were presented there, or Pericles, they were caricatured, memed versions of the actual ones as a form of critique. So I think it's very interesting how...
So it's about the order, about the rules, playing by the rules, but also very much about cheating, right? When we talk about politics and play.
Yes.
It's about bending the rules or ignoring the rules, which can become sort of big scandals can stem from that. Corrupt governments don't play by the rules, basically.
That's one aspect, but I think if I go back to Aris's argument, the media are important. So that's... Let's say if you talk about animation is something else than theater.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's forms of illusion involved that the theater started to play with, let's say in the Baroque, where you would kind of start to not know what the play is and let's say the real. But as long as you mock things, as long as you stage things with an audience, we're all looking, it's very difficult to make an illusion that somehow shifts our ontological grounds. That we think, where are we now?
Yeah.
Where are we now? Yeah.
And I think that's something that you see going on also in Dutch politics a lot, actually, with the whole, people saying things in the Tweede Kamer, the House of Representatives, that aren't supposed to be said there. And then actually what happens is a lot of the blame is directed at the chair of that house, because that's she is the one who should have put a stop to this, should have arbitrated on time that this was not playing by the rules, and so in a sense that's part of the game. And it's part of the game to play the system with and not be faulted for it.
It's also intriguing, right? If you look at alt-right or media platforms, that they often make jokes, sometimes often cheesy, totally off jokes, also play with making mistakes. And it's very difficult then to say, this is wrong what you're doing, because then they will just say, I was just joking, I was just fooling around, I was just playing.
Yeah.
So play is also this mechanism which is very ambiguous, to call to what Sutton Smith calls ambiguous. And that's also what it makes it, at the one hand, very powerful, but also very slippery, right, in politics.
Yeah, and I think that, part of that is very much like traditional improvising, in the sense that it wants to seem more ambiguous or more
slip of the tongue,
more spontaneous than it really is. Like there's a lot of thought behind how in the alt-right you're sort of drawn into kind of via shocking jokes into really kind of serious.
Well, one thing that is sometimes ambiguous, sometimes not, is time, which is also a playful element. So I'm in the unfortunate situation.
We won't play for time now.
Yeah, no. Exactly. We're not going to play for time, but we are going to play our next segment, Past of the Pops.
And as always, we end our vodcast with Past of the Pops, where we present our pick of present-day media we're in good company here for that as well, that is somehow entangled with the past. Aris, what do you have to offer for this week?
Today, I want to talk about one of my favorite bands of the last, say, 5-7 years. People may not know it, but people may be able to recognize it. I'm very much of a metalhead kind of guy. I enjoy my metal, I enjoy my rock, and that's the... What can I say? So
I forgive you.
Thank you. This coming from somebody who's into punk,
Exactly.
I appreciate it. So I want to talk to you about a band called the Villagers of Ioannina City. Ioannina is the capital city of the region of Epirus in Greece. And they are coming from that place. And it has a lot of very impactful, very intense local music, traditional local music. And it's the kind of, not the kind of Greek music that you think, oh, the bouzouki and kind of upbeat and dancey, but really Epirus is known for also in terms of stories and folklore, for darker stories, a bit more low tempo music. So they took this more low tempo music and they turned it into psychedelic kind of stoner rock because it really fits very well. So they use all the traditional instruments. They use the bagpipe, they use traditional flutes, but they also use the guitars. And they have an album called Riza, where they replayed a lot of these traditional songs from Epirus into their metal versions or psychedelic rock versions. And they became a huge hit in Greece because all of a sudden a lot of youth had a way to connect with the past in a very unexpected way. It had been done in the 70s, if people know Aphrodite's Child and Socrates Drank the Conium, this kind of band, they did use rhythms from Epirus and tones from Epirus into their music, but now it's done in a more metal way. They are huge in Greece, sold out shows for years. They also had planned a show in Amsterdam, but it got cancelled due to COVID. It was very unfortunate. I was very sad. Hopefully they will come back. But if you're into that kind of stuff, definitely check them out, Villagers of Ioannina City.
Nice. So they're the equivalent of the Pogues when it comes to punk, who do that with Irish music.
Yes, very, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
And what about you, Sybille?
Yeah, I've been thinking about what to say today about my past of the pops, because I've been struggling this week very much with writing an article about playful methodologies, and I was thinking about how playful methodologies are, again, about not following the rules of methods always, but being creative at the methods you use, right? And how you can almost use, it's very close to cheating, but it shouldn't be cheating in the academy, because then that's wrong, right? That's unethical. So I've been thinking about what ways do we have to introduce playful methods in our research, and not only for the humanities and the social sciences, but I think imagination and just doing something a bit different can often, like the eyes, which may have been different in the past, bring a different view to things, and through that you see things differently. So I've been thinking about where does this sort of playful method already occurs, right? And I can think a lot about contemporary stuff, like using artistic art in classrooms, for example. A colleague of mine in Australia uses that, artistic interventions, what she calls it. You can do data sprints, they're a kind of playful method. You can do a playful way of writing, can be playful. But then I was thinking, how does that, because I've been thinking about this, how does that really relate to the past? How can you do, say, historical or archaeological research and have playful methods? And maybe you can help me a bit with this, Aris, because I think that's close to experimental methods, actually, in archaeology. But maybe you can quickly, briefly help me out here.
Yeah, it is quite a bit. It's not that playful methods have been used too much in archaeology. It's something that I'm very interested in using in archaeology, and hopefully I'll get to do it more in the future. But in many ways, archaeology is a very playful science. We get to play around in the soil, we get to play around in the ground and play around with little objects. It has all the play around in the lab with this. So it has all these fundamental aspects of play.
Cracking the egg.
Cracking the egg, or piecing together a pot like a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
Or piecing together the evidence, or even, you walk into an archaeological site and you walk through an ancient doorway, and somehow even that activity becomes a bit playful because you put yourself.
And it helps with the research in a way, right?
And it helps with the research, in many ways. So there is a lot there, and hopefully we'll get to do more with that. But it is true that there is a lot that can happen, I think, with playful research in archaeology, for sure.
Nice. So, Frans Willem, what do you have to bring to the table?
I have growing hair.
Really?
Yep.
Where?
So I'm not sure whether everywhere. So I'm not sure whether you followed the news, but there's a European Championship going on.
Yeah.
And I was just checking how many of these young players have long hair.
Females, males,
Males.
non-binary.
Males.
Well, everybody.
Everybody.
But in this case, males, because that's
So it's the male
that's
European
the male
tournament.
European, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm fascinated by it because, let's say, the years in which I was fascinated with soccer and Dutch soccer was the 70s, and everyone had long hair.
A blast from the past.
Everyone had long hair, and
Yeah.
now it's gone.
Yeah.
It's bold seems to be, let's say, the
Yeah.
new thing.
Is it an aerodynamic thing, you think?
No. I think it's fascism. Fascism. Yeah. So long hair is always suspect. It kind of blurs the gender boundaries.
Did you hear that, Aris?
I very much appreciate my long hair.
I know.
Also for blending the genders.
So I think, let's say, soccer has become less and less of a play, and my proof is that most of the players are bold.
Oh, that's a very interesting argument.
And how do you identify with that as a person?
I'm longing for the times in which
You could have long hair.
We're playing
Yeah.
instead of being part of a machine that has to win, and so it's just have a look at it. It's fascinating. So people who could have very long hair are kind of almost bold, or if they're not bold, they have such an enormous amount of gel on their hair that it seems to be kind of a helmet. It's fascinating.
Fair enough.
So the play has left them, you say?
Yes, that would be my argument.
Yeah.
And as soon as they start to play again,
We will see more.
So
long hair.
there's some ludic nostalgia there.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
interesting. And Sara?
I didn't know that it had to be kind of popular current day, but I've
doesn't
brought
have
a
to.
very old-fashioned
Doesn't have to be.
game. It's a game that I took from my grandparents' house when that was kind of taken apart, and it turns out to be very, very popular in my house currently. It's called the advertisement game. It sounds like really capitalist and so on, but it's got and the way it's you play it. It's got advertisements cut up into 3, and you kind of jumble them. Like you can do them as a puzzle and make it correct, but actually the fun way of playing this game is to have them at random. So it's like the pink ones are always the beginning, like grand seasonal sale, and then the yellow ones are the middle ones. A calculator, listening to the name Snoopy. So that becomes like one advertisement that makes no
nice.
sense,
Ah,
but
nice.
therefore is funny.
Feels like a precursor to Cards Against Humanity, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I thought I was taking this as a kind of relic from the past that would appeal to no one anymore, but it's actually super popular among my 2 7 and 9-year-old kids who find it hilarious and who are not at all interested in puzzling together the right things, but in all the kind of.
But you also have that you have this paper you fold, right?
It's really actually like that.
Yeah. Play has duration, right?
Yeah.
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 Even an old board game can still be a ton of fun today.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter.
But this isn't even a board game. It's like
Yeah.
it's really stupid actually.
Well,
But it works.
Yeah.
if it works, it's not stupid, I think.
Exactly.
Right?
Great. And with that, I want to thank you very much for being with us, for coming to our podcast. I will cue out them.
Yeah.
Outro grooves. This was this week's past.
We'll be back before you know it with more goodness on streamingthepast.com.
And in the meantime, don't forget to catch our Let's Plays and our Past Pros every Wednesday, Thursday and Friday from 2 to 5 every single week.
To those with us on Twitch, thank you for being present.
And of course, many thanks to the people, to the future people watching us on YouTube or listening this to as a podcast on your favorite podcast platform.
And thanks to all the past people who made this present possible.
So whenever you are, wherever you are, we hope you stay happy.
And stay healthy. Bye.
Bye.